Yeah.
This is Irene Wallin,
Yes.
Teren Novotny, Sandy Treml, and Sylvia Erickson-Koll. Let's give them.
We are kind of the foursome that seem to go everywhere and do everything because we live here. And Glennis, I thought, oh, Glennis, good thing you went and talked to Glennis. You picked the right one. And I said to the girls when we were eating supper, I said, you know, if Glennis was here, we wouldn't have to worry about saying one single thing.
She was a spokesperson for you a lot.
Oh,
Yeah.
and Irene.
And Irene. All right. This is my dream. I dreamed about this for like 2 years. My gosh, I thought we gotta get to Willmar and do this concert here. We've sung their song across the country at countless concerts, and here you guys are. So I'm just gonna throw it open to the audience. Who has questions for any of them? Just yell them out. Anybody think of something? Well, be thinking of something, and I've got some questions for you. I know, it's hard to see you guys. I have some questions for you, and then you guys be thinking of some, because I know you must have questions. So I know your bank strike was the first bank strike in Minnesota, but I've also heard there was a first bank strike in the U.S. Do you think that's true? Have you guys ever heard that?
Yes, we have heard that. And at the time we heard it too. And everybody thought we were absolutely crazy, including us. But it didn't start out to be a strike. It started out to be a complaint to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And that was in 1976, November. And so it took us a year to try to get a contract and try to do things before we went on strike. So it didn't just say one day we'd say, well, you know what? We're not working here anymore. But it took that whole year of negotiating and so forth. And so it wasn't as quick as you think. And during that whole time we were working within the bank, and it was very difficult because when we would come to work in the morning, we want to make sure that the night before we had counted our drawers right and counted the money right, and we were watched by everybody, and we watched everybody, and so it was very uncomfortable inside the bank for that entire year.
And why were you watching your drawers so carefully?
Well, all it would take was for us to be, one of us, especially tellers, to be short $500, $200,
And
whatever, and they could easily get rid of all of us.
Right, just say, oh boy, yeah, that would be a good reason to get rid of you.
Yeah.
Get rid of the problem.
Yep.
Should we just pass it down and like ask questions of different people?
Yep.
So this is Teren Novotny, and so I also read that you were the first bank workers union in Minnesota.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. How did you guys know how to form a union? You got help, right? Because how would you know how to do that?
Boy.
That's a huge question.
My memory isn't as good as others.
You can let somebody else answer.
How did we go about doing that? Exactly.
Well, I think we had a lot of help from our attorney, and his wife was president of the NOW organization, and that's how we ever got the scene started. So it just like took progression steps, and we finally decided that we had to form a union if we were going to get a contract. And so that's how the whole union thing came about. And we didn't start out even thinking of that. We just wanted to move up in the ranks at the bank with equal pay. And we thought we were going to be out on this strike for probably 10 days, and the bank thought 2 weeks or vice versa. And it turned out to be just under 2 years, and which none of us thought of. And during that time, the bank was sold, and the union just came about as a necessity so we could get a contract, basically.
I'm coming right back. I just want to make sure I'm getting you on this camera too. Yes, we have everybody on there. Good.
My memory of details isn't quite as good as the others. I kind of came in on the situation after it had already started. And when I interviewed with Leo Persh for the position, I'm not sure exactly how it came out, but he knew that I was newly married to my husband Kurt, who's still with me.
There he is. Wait for us.
And
There you go.
and he said, "Well, if you're just married now, I suppose you'll get pregnant right away." So
Was that surprising though? I mean, in the 70s, that seemed probably like a normal thing for people to say.
I can remember thinking,
This kind of
"God, what
strange.
an odd question, you know," but I just said, "Well, we don't have any plans right now." You know, what can you say? Anyway, so I was hired and I was on probation, a 3-month probation. And shortly after I started, I was in a break room on my own, and one of the junior officers came in and asked me if I knew what was going on at the bank, and I said, "Well, I've heard a little bit here and there," and he said, "Well, you're on probation, so if you get involved with these other women, you'll lose your job." And so, it didn't work the way he wanted it to. Then I started asking questions, but anyway, I was kind of on the tail end of a lot of the activity that was, you know, led up to the situation that we were on strike, and so my recall isn't as good as the others. I'm sure glad I was a part of it. I would not want to do that again under those same circumstances. It was difficult. We all showed up almost every day. It was kind of hard to get sick when you're out in the cold and no germs survive. And but if there were many times that I'm sure each one of us didn't want to show up at the picket line, but our numbers were so low that our hearts wouldn't allow us to do that. So
Would you go be there like what time? Or like banking hours? Would you be
Bank
there?
hours,
All the hours they were open. You were just dedicated.
They were working bankers hours.
You were working bankers hours. What, 9 to 5 or something?
yeah,
And that's a long time to
and
be
then
out
we'd
of
go
home.
back on Monday nights because they were open Monday
Go
nights.
home.
Yeah.
Fix dinner, get the kids going, put your snowmobile suit back on, and go back out till 8 o'clock that night.
On Monday.
On Mondays, yeah. We just couldn't stand to see the bank open the curtains in the front of the bank. So that whole time that we were out, those curtains never got open because we were always there.
They kept them closed. Did you have something to add, Sandy, or should I ask you another question?
I read that,
Sorry, go ahead.
I came in on the strike just before Teren, or just after, no, before you. And, I also was asked questions like, I suppose you're gonna get pregnant right away on us and, you know, that sort of thing. I got asked that repeatedly for months and, you know, always never answered, you know, just, well, no plans for it yet, you know. But, we were talking about Monday nights, and one Monday night in particular, I remember, was kind of interesting. We had some big, tall guys come and help us picket that night, and we were all just walking back and forth, visiting and stuff, and a police car pulled up across the street, and he just sat there and watched us. And finally Irene went over there and talked to him and says, "Well, what are you doing here?" He said, "Well, you know, I've seen these other guys over here," so Greg got kind of nervous. They thought they better send the squad car over and see what was going on. And Irene asked the cop, "Well, do you know who these guys are?" And he says, "No." "Well, they were the guards from the reformatory in St. Cloud." So that was kind of a memorable night.
What, did they come to check on you, or?
They came to help us pick it.
Oh,
They came to
help you
picket with us.
I've met at least one person that came to help picket with you. She lives in Oregon now, Sandy Bly, but I can't remember her maiden name. Somebody here who was a friend of Sandy Bly. What was her original name?
Sandy Oz.
Do you remember her? She picketed with you, and she thinks she brought you food too. So there were a lot of people that weren't very happy about the strike, but there were some people that came to picket or
Yes.
were on your side that approved of it, right?
And we found out later, you know, that a lot of people were on our side, but they didn't dare say anything or, you know,
Right.
make it known because they were afraid of many different things. They were afraid of having their bank loans called or, you know, any number of things, or not being able to get a loan, or, you know, just those kind of things.
Right, right. I had a question about Doris, who passed away. I read that she was like the anchor of the group. One article said that. In what way was she the anchor? What did she do to anchor you all?
This is
This is Irene's answer.
Well, Doris had a strength about her that she was so quiet and so, what should I say, dignified, but she was so angry, and the picture you saw of her up here, that really told the story of Doris. She was so angry. However, she was so strong that when it came to having her go back into the bank because of the situation with the strike, she had to go back in, and she was a senior member of the group. So as we were coming to our, whoever was next in line went in. So she had to go in, and she was in the bank, and we were outside. And but she was not treated particularly well. They drew caricatures of us and left things in her teller window. And we would pick her up for lunch, go for lunch, and bring her back, and she'd have to go back inside there. And I just can't imagine what that was like. But she hung in there, because if she hadn't gone back in, she had to drop everything. And there was no way that she was going to leave us. And so she did that for months. And I know when it came my turn to go back in, the strike was over, and I had another job. And the bank had a new owner. So you can imagine the difference when I went back in and when she went back in. And she just was our rock.
That's good to know. You know, I have to just put in one little thing. Glenna's told me that when she went back into work, because the judge ruled that they had to hire people back, but when there was an opening. So Glenna said eventually she got hired back, but she only stayed about 2 weeks, because as soon as she started working there again, she said it was before the days of when you would lock up your cash drawer. And she said at least once or twice her cash drawer would be way off, and she'd been sabotaged. Somebody else did it, she believed, and so she quit after 2 weeks because she thought, well, she could see the writing on the wall. She'd be fired for things she hadn't done.
Sylvia will tell you about that. Sylvia will tell you her own experience of that very thing.
Is this after the strike, Sylvia?
Right. I went back in, and one day I get called into the office and said, is this your,
Can you get closer?
oh, is this your initials? Well, it said SE. Yeah, I guess that's my initials. You cashed a check, and it was a stolen check. You're done. I said, is there some information about it? Can I look? Can I help you, try to figure this out? Nope, you're done. I was set up. Was not allowed to even try and figure out what happened. So that's.
And then you were fired, that was it?
Yes. I
How
was
long did
fired
you
that
work
day.
there before that happened?
You know what? I can't even remember how long I was back in.
Oh, wow.
Not very long. Not very long. No.
Just came and went.
Oh.
And it was just kind of another punch,
Loretta, I have a question. Did you hear any negative, did people call you names or insult you from the community when you were going through this?
Did everybody hear Peggy's question? Did people from the community insult you or give you negative feedback when you were during the strike?
Somewhat, like on the picket line, all I remember is one young teenager hollering from the parts store, you know, "Smoke pot, get high," you know.
What did he yell?
"Smoke pot, get high."
Smoke pot, get high. What?
Irene
Must be
can tell you
Miller.
stories about, how her son was treated.
Well, we were more or less ostracized by the community. And so, rather than say anything, people would drive by and, you know, give you the finger or whatever. And at the time, my son was like 9 years old, probably a little younger. And he wanted to join the Cub Scouts. And so I said, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll do that." And there were meetings being held, so I took him and we went to the meeting. And he had a friend that was going to go too, and he was all excited. And so they both started, and they went to their first den meeting. And he came home and he said, "I can't go back there again." And I said, "Oh really? What happened?" I thought he'd probably done something. And he said, "No, the lady there told me I can't come back there because my mother was on strike." And so I said, "Well, then we'll just find another den for you to go to." But he didn't want to because his friends were in this particular den. So he never did become a Cub Scout or a Boy Scout or any of those things. And it was just those little things. And if you wanted a job, you could forget it. There was no job in Willmar for you. And for a long time afterwards. A long time. So most of us got jobs, like Sandy got a job with the state of Minnesota Employment Office because she went there so often to look for a job that they finally said, "We'll hire you."
You wore him down.
So she got a job, yeah. And I got a job with a company out of St. Cloud. Teren went back to school. Sylvia was working in New London at the nursing home. And so,
And what, didn't Glennis work for a union?
let us work for a union.
For a school teachers
Right.
union.
And so, even though it wasn't that obvious most of the time, like it was with my son, it still was there. And I think probably if I went in today or 10 years ago and asked for a job at certain places, there would not be a job there for me.
People
So-
remembered it for a long
Yeah.
time.
It
So are there still people now that, even now that,
well,
have bitterness toward you?
I think after the documentary came out and they saw what was happening, a lot of people changed their minds and they told us so. And they said, "God, we had no idea," because our Willmar paper wouldn't put in anything but Associated Press releases. But papers around us, like the St. Paul Pioneer Press and Minneapolis Star, and papers from all over, had more in them. And they didn't, Willmar people knew less about it than people in St. Paul.
They didn't know everything you'd gone
They had
through
no
to cause
idea.
the strike.
And it was an issue that was feminist, and it was a union issue, and it became a political issue. We went to see the governor and wanted funds pulled out of that bank. And so it kind of went in a great big circle. So in some cases, union members would cross a picket line, and we would think, "Oh, jeepers, you know, they shouldn't be doing that." But they had their house loans there and their car loans there. And threats were made to call in those loans if they helped us in any way, shape, or form. So there were a lot of reasons that people didn't want to really openly support us. And we had one, Sylvia's church was very open, like to our filming there. But most churches had nothing to say and nothing to do, even though it was quite a social issue also. And we had one church, it was a Unitarian church in Willmar, and they would periodically invite us there to update what was going on. But there was no other church or anything that helped us in any way. And so we kind of felt a little bit on the outside there too, also.
Can I, maybe, should we pass the mic down and
Yes.
let me ask, I always wonder if your strike inspired other people to fight for justice. Have you heard any stories of that? People that said to you, you know, we fought for something because of you. Have
There
you
was
heard
another
anything?
bank in Willmar that, had a union and they,
Did they have a union after yours, you mean?
yes,
Yeah.
they organized.
Was it, and was probably because of you, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, we got letters from all over the country, saying, you know, stick with it, you know, you're helping me, and, you know, thank you, and we've heard from people even overseas. Like one of the ladies that worked at the college with me, she went on a trip to, Ireland, and was with a group, and they had kind of some time off, so most of them went to their room and just sat around for a while and rested. And they came back down and talked to another group, and they said that they had watched the documentary on the TV up there. So it got all over the place. And then I was gonna say too, Irene, about when you're talking about Willmar, you mentioned too many times over that the chamber and different businesses, they never came and asked us what was going on. You know, to find out why we were doing this. It was always just, don't sit, don't talk.
I guess I can be a proud mama and say that our son, Cole, was involved with activity at UC Berkeley campus with the Occupy the Farm movement. And they were taking back there was a piece of land called the Guild Tract that was given to the UC Berkeley for agricultural purposes that was being underused, and they wanted to sell off the land for, I think it was a Whole Foods store. Anyway, there was a group of activists that stopped that activity, and he was involved in it, so.
Yeah.
I
He
mean,
learned
proud
that,
mama.
he learned that activism from his mom, I would say so. That is so cool.
I think what Sandy was referring to is, at the time, the city council, the mayor walked by our picket line every day within about a half a block and never once came over and asked us a single question about what was going on. Yet they were so upset because Willmar was in the news, we were on the TV, we were everywhere. And, but they never once called us in and said, you know, they could have probably mediated the situation and put it into it, and then we wouldn't be here talking to you. But not a single one of them came, not a one.
Has anyone else thought of any questions for these ladies? Just shout them out. Yeah, there's one right there. Yeah, what was it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge you women. It's amazing. So I come from Willmar, and I just moved back recently, and really proud of what it is that you've done. I've heard about, you know, I haven't heard as much detail as I have tonight, but just, first of all, just acknowledge who you're being in the world still today, after all these years, so hats off to you for that. Question, how do you think the work that you've done, is it having the impact today that you thought that it might, all these years later?
He said, is your strike having the impact today that you thought it would? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Did you expect it to have an impact back then when you were doing it?
No.
It was
When we
really,
started this, it was just for ourselves. What was going on we had no idea or even thought about how this was going on in the whole country. But we soon found out that, you know what, this is going on everywhere. I wish that we had made more progress since then. I think we are at like 76 cents on a dollar. And we were.
talking about women's
Yeah,
income as
and we
compared to
were
men's.
like 48. So we haven't gained nearly the ground that we should have. But I'm gonna just tell you guys that this never stopped in these 40 years. People think We just went away and we stayed at home and we did nothing. However, during this 40 years, we have worked with students from both high schools and colleges who are doing their papers and entering contests on the Willmar 8, and we have spent time with them. We have done workshops, and we we just keep on and on and on, because if you don't, it's gonna die, and we don't want that to happen.
So you are having a big impact on people. And now, we're doing our little part. We sing your song everywhere across the country. We just were on the West Coast for 5 weeks, and we sang it so many places. They especially liked it in California. People got up and danced to your song. No one ever dances to our music, but they did in California.
That's good here.
Yes, yes.
I've got a comment. In that same era, there was a young man from Africa, I believe it was Namibia, that came and spent time in our country. And I got to know him pretty well. And he said, you know, in our country, women don't have any power and they know it. In this country, women don't have any power and they don't know it.
Did you all hear
Yes,
this lady?
yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
Wow.
One question, were any of the laws that have been changed as a result of your movement?
Did you hear that? Have any laws changed as a result of your movement back then?
Not as many as we'd like.
Well, there were already laws in place, weren't there? When I interviewed Glenna, she said there were already laws in place from the 60s guaranteeing equal income, but they were
National Labor
not
Relations
enforced.
Board also had rules and regulations, but they weren't followed. And all, through our court case, all the bank had to do at the end was, yes, they had discriminated, however, they had to hang a poster in the break room that said they would never discriminate against people for their sex, race, the whole religion. That's all the punishment they got. The bigger punishment was probably that they had to call us back in as our seniority came due. So I was only back a couple months, and under the new ownership, and it was quite different. But then the company that I had gotten a job with came and asked me if I was going to stay there or did I want to come back to work for them as a manager. And I thought, well, I had finished what I had started. So I left and went back with them and worked for them for 25 years. Yeah.
Your turn. Anybody else have a question? So bright.
I was
Yeah.
thinking, one of the best honors that we got was from Teamsters Union out of Toronto, Canada.
Yeah.
They built a 8-story housing complex in our name,
Oh, wow.
and that was quite an honor.
Toronto.
Irene and Glennis went there for the groundbreaking,
Wow.
came back with 8 little bags of dirt for us.
Wow.
And then when it was finished, they got to go again.
Wow.
It's quite an honor.
Did you have a
I
question?
remember Irene saying to some reporter that if I died right now, they'd never get the smile off my face.
What was your question?
Were one of you the one that overheard the conversation in the vault?
The one that I was singing about was Glennis.
Glennis.
And then how did it happen after that? So she heard the conversation in the vault and she talked to,
That was kind of poetic license
That's okay,
because
I just-
all these women started talking to each other, and the one I interviewed was Glenna, so that's why I mentioned her name so
Yeah.
often in the song. So it was kind of an opening to it, that's how she heard about it, was she heard people talking about it. So what was the timeline of who started talking about it very
I
first?
think we all just kept,
We just were
they
mad.
can't do this to us, you know?
At least you that were working there earlier,
Yes,
because then
yes.
Teren started.
But all we had to do was
After
look at
you
those
started-
that had worked there longer. All we had to do was look at those that had worked longer than we had, and we could see exactly what was gonna happen. So,
Curtis, do you have a question?
Did
for-
they use rubber bands at the bank much?
Oh, do you wanna go there? Glennis told us a story of the rubber bands. Do you remember what that is? This was before the strike ever started or anything. Glennis, the woman that I interviewed, said, well, all the women were tellers and sat on one side of the bank, And the manager sat on the other side, so when no customers were in there, she said the men would shoot rubber bands at them. And I didn't put that in the song, I thought about it, but I thought that is so undignified. And then they got points if they hit certain parts of their bodies.
No.
Now, this doesn't happen in the 2000s, but in the 70s,
I hope not.
you know.
Oh, another thing I think important is that what's a great honor to us is that for Minnesota's 150th birthday, out of 1,700 or 2,700 nominations, we got to be one of the 150 chosen to be put in a book.
Wow.
And that was a great honor. Seen the Min 150 book, if you ever picked that up, that's.
Top 150 events.
Yeah, events.
Top
people,
events.
places, and things.
It, wasn't there also a display at the Minnesota History Center in
Yes.
St. Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was there for
Very
probably
deservedly.
5 years, I think.
Yeah, very deservedly, yes. Let me ask, one of you, what was, like, I wanna know what, like, the lowest point was and the highest point. What was, like, when you just thought you couldn't do it anymore, or like, when you really were happy about it? Does anybody have any idea?
Every day you thought you couldn't do it anymore.
Did you hear this? Every day.
Every day you thought you couldn't do it anymore. But every day, everybody showed up. And so that was the lift for the day when everybody else came. You got together, you talked it out. We talked out everything. And that made room for the next day. Then you get up, get the kids off to school, get your snowmobile suit on, and head right out again. But I can't tell you how many days that you think, I cannot do this. Yeah, there were a lot of them.
Did Sylvia have something to add?
No.
Did you?
It's just that.
Let me,
We really did depend on each other, that's for sure. You learn to depend on each other. And I think a lot of people don't know that in the beginning of this, when we filed our lawsuit, there were 13 women involved. And only 8 ended up going out on strike and joining the union because others were made promises. We will pay you more if you don't join the union, and we will, so, and threats were made. So we had 13, and so people say, okay, well, if you're such a great union, where are the men? I said, there weren't any. They were all officers. So we had no men to join our union.
One day I watched one of the officers come to the window next to me, and he passed this teller a note. She read it, dropped it in her wastebasket. So when she went for lunch, I dropped a bunch of papers on the floor, put my hand in her wastebasket and took out all the papers and went downstairs for my lunch break. And here was a paper, and she had asked him, what will happen if we don't go out on strike? And he said, you'll be paid more.
in writing, you saw it in writing.
In writing, yes. But we were told to hang on to that paper. It would be it would be better use later, for some negotiations, and then it was no good. It went too long.
Waited too long.
Waited too long.
Did anybody else have other questions? We don't wanna, here's a question up here. Yeah, Mindy?
I wondered at the time, back in 78, 79, were there any women on city council or in government, legislators, or anybody who you could have contacted that might have helped you, or were there none at that time?
Like our city council, you mean?
Yeah. Or
Well,
legislators?
They weren't interested. They were interested.
Were there any?
There were no women. Oh, no, there were no women. No, I'm afraid not. But I wish there had been, because I think that's the one person that would have come and asked what's going on. And later on, though, there were women. It's taken a long time for Willmar to get, like 2-3 women on the council. But they do a bang-up job, and I'm really happy that they're there. Sandy ran for city council and just scared the living daylights out of the whole community that she might win. But we did it just to do it and see what would happen. She got quite a few votes.
Does anyone else?
I have a question.
Anybody, any other questions? Yes.
What happened with Karen Holtz? Wasn't she part of the striking?
She said, what happened with Karen Holtz? Was she part of the strike? No.
She was not a part of the strike, she was a part of the original 13 that filed the lawsuit.
Oh.
And she and her husband were very involved with us. And then one day, out of the blue, she came and she said, I can't do this anymore. And I said, are you kidding me? You're gonna drop out? And she said, yes, I have to drop out. She never told us why. So, but it could have been a threat, it could have been a bribe, it could have been anything or nothing. Maybe she just decided not to, I don't know. But things show up later on, like many years later, and you find out different things about why things went on. And, you know, we left it up to each person, you know, and even on strike, you know, we left it up to each person. If you're gonna go back to your job when your turn comes, some went back, some did not. But we didn't hold it against them because we knew what it was like to go back in there. So, and maybe they had a good job. I had a good job. I just had to finish. I just have this stubborn thing. I had to finish what I'd started. It was very odd after over 2 years to go back into that bank. Let me tell you, just took about everything I had.
Anybody else have any other questions? Any other questions? Did you want to say something?
One other thing about Doris, when she went back into the bank, you know, she wasn't treated well. And during that time, her oldest son had open heart surgery. And that made it extra tough for her on the inside.
Wow. I wanted to add a couple things that Glennis told me about that you can elaborate on. She said that there was a parking spot in front of the bank where in the middle of the winter they would have a cars parked there and then take turns getting in there to warm up. And then eventually the bank somehow got that turned into it wasn't a parking spot anymore, so you couldn't park there. So they knew somebody to do that for you, to do it for them, I mean. And also she told me, we always think of the freezing cold of the winter, and but you also were there during the heat of the summer, and she told me that sometimes they would put like fertilizer on the grass, like manure. So just, do you remember that? Glennis remembered like manure being spread, like they would say, well, this is fertilizer, so I mean, just anything to make your life miserable.
Yeah. Summer times were bad because it was hot and there were bugs. So wintertime frostbite, summertime bug bite. So wintertime cold, summertime hot. So we tried in the wintertime and stuff sometimes too. The coldest day I think that we were out was 72 below wind chill. And my mother called me and she said, you are not going out there today. And I said, oh yes, we are. And so we did, and that's when Glennis is talking about eyelids freezing shut and so forth. And that's the day you look at each other and you look at this young gal who's almost the same age as my oldest daughter, and you think, what in the world are we doing? Why are we here? And it was lonely because nobody came on those really cold days. And yeah. And we actually had a school teacher in Willmar who brought a class to picket with us. And when she got back to school with that class, she was going to bring her next class, and they said she would be fired if she would take the kids back to the picket line. So they weren't supposed to learn any of those social issues, just what was in the book.
Wow.
So a lot of people, the fingers went a lot of places. And later on you would hear about it and you think, oh my goodness, you know, she almost lost her job because of us.
Well, later on, we were in the book.
Oh.
We were in the book.
I know you're old when that book has now been retired.
I don't know whose child saw it first or whatever. I know that the history book was still being used when our oldest son was in 6th grade. It was their Minnesota history book. And under unions.
But
under unions and, yeah, so we had, I think, a one-page thing. Yeah, we were in the book, so.
That's great. That's great. Has anybody written a book about the Willmar? They should.
No,
There should be.
that's-
Somebody
that's-
should write a book.
We've talked about it, but,
That's-
yeah.
Here's what I wanted to do. I've been after this for 40 years. Can you imagine? I wanted each one to write a chapter of how that person felt and what it affected in their life and so forth. I haven't gotten them to do it yet. But I think before I die, it would be fun because I think you'd have 8 different stories. For now, we would have to have maybe one of Doris's children write what they felt about their mother. And, but for the rest of us, how did you get to do this? And how did you feel? And were you afraid? And were you mad? Were you angry? Now the little test here tonight scared the liver out of me because we took test after test after test from professors and psychologists and stuff that came, and they wanted to know through these tests that we took them, we didn't have nothing else to do. So we took these psychological tests and they wanted to know why these 8 people could go out every day and be with each other every day, stick to your guns on what you were doing, and what was the common denominator of those 8 people? Well, we were all different ages. Doris and I were the oldest. I was 40 and she was like 47, 46. And Glennis was 19. What on earth would we ever have in common? And we were none of us actually the same religion. We all belonged to different churches. We all had different types of education. We had different upbringings. We weren't even all from Willmar. But you know what they forgot? They just plain forgot how angry we were. And that's the common denominator. We were all just very angry at what was happening to us and other women throughout the working area, that we had to keep training these people. It didn't happen more than once to Doris and I, for heaven's sake. We were up there in the years. I'd been in banking for 20 years. And the only reason we had a woman assistant cashier was so the guys could go golfing at 3 o'clock and there'd be an officer in the bank. And we would balance the bank before we went home. And so, it just, it was a real simple answer. They were looking for something a little more complicated, but it wasn't. It was just that we all felt cheated and we were angry.
Well, with that note, I think we need to wrap things up so the Barn Theater can close down. But I just wanted to take a couple minutes to ask anyone if they had any comments just about the whole show tonight, because we're recording them, and then we can give all our feedback to the Minnesota State Arts Board, who gave us a grant. Thank you so much for filling out the evaluation forms. Peggy over here has a box, and I think there's another one in the lobby. Did anybody else have any comments about just the whole show, or the Willmar 8, or any other part of it?
Loved it. But we had a song. We had a song on the picket line.
Did you?
And so,
Let's do it.
so,
Do you remember it?
yeah, oh yeah. Well, there was a gal with the AFSCME local in Willmar, and her name was Jackie Joday. And the first day of the strike, and first or second, she came and she said, "I have a song we have to sing." And of course, we were so excited and so into it. And so this is how we were psychologically at the beginning of the strike. So here's our song. Ready? We'll never stagger, we'll never fall. We'll show the bank they can't win 'em all. Marching, marching, day by day, we'll fight till the bastions fall. La 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 la.
so much, and thank you everybody for coming, and thank you. Take their message out in the world, let's all fight for justice. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.